Over the past few years, there's been tremendous progress in bringing modern, affordable, web-based tools to mid-sized organizations who are looking to automate and optimize the accounts payable process. This is particularly true for the IBM I, the System I-Series, or whatever you prefer to call this versatile platform. Today, we will examine the challenges IBM I users face and how others have successfully implemented web-based automation. My name is Jim Scott, Senior Vice President and General Manager of ACOM Solutions. I'm very pleased to introduce our two very experienced speakers today. Milan Agte, CPA and our leading expert on AP automation, and David Adams, Regional Manager for our document management and payment solutions. First, a word about the session itself. We invite you to submit any questions you may have in the chat box on the right hand of the screen, and we will address those questions at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. First, a quick word about ACOM Solutions itself. We are a 30-year-old organization currently supporting over 4,000 active customers. We not only develop our software, but also provide the professional services to implement our solutions at the customer site and provide the ongoing support services. With respect to the IBM I market, we currently support 2,200 active customers providing document and process automation solutions. And if any of you would like more information about our company, we invite you to visit our website, acom.com, or simply request more information at the end of the webinar. So let's take a look at today's agenda. First, we'll look at to see what is behind the drive to automate accounts payable. We'll look at some of the challenges and the trends taking place right now. Secondly, we will provide an overview of the key components of an AP automation solution. Where does it start and what is the end point? From there, we'll take a closer look at the components of the phases of automation and show actual automation in action. And then finally, we have allowed time at the end of the session to answer the questions that you may have. So let me start by turning the presentation over to our first presenter, Milan Agte. Milan?
Thank you, Jim. As Jim had mentioned here, the first part of the presentation, I'm going to do an overview of what is AP automation and then actually show you by logging into a website how our solution works. And then I'm going to turn it back over to David to show you certain components of the solution itself. Now, in terms of AP automation, the way we have looked at it is that all people who are involved with the AP department really have a couple of different kinds of pressures that they are facing. One is an external pressure which could come from senior management or other people in the company. And this particular slide, which was put together by a consulting group called the Aberdeen Group, lists what are the top reasons why the AP department is looking to improve the way they process items. And essentially, you can see that the top pressures here are there needs to be more visibility of where an invoice is as it is going through its approval cycle. There needs to be a way to reduce the cost, and since almost everybody's invoices are all paper-based, the question becomes, how do you find the paper when you need to? So those are some of the reasons why there are external pressures on an AP department to actually improve on the way that they're processing invoices. So now the question becomes, well, that was how the outside world is looking in. Well, what about the people who are in the AP department? How do they view the challenges that they are facing? So here is a result of a survey conducted by another external organization called PayStream Advisors. And among the reasons that percolate to the top are that the majority of the invoices are coming in a paper format. So again, handling paper is a big problem. The second thing is that you have to then take the paper and manually do the data entry, and you have to manually, after the process is done, store the invoices. So there are a lot of manual processes involved. And finally, the whole routing, because this is a manual paper-based solution, invoices have to be routed around, and there is a lack of cohesiveness in how that invoice gets routed around. So these are sort of the challenges that the internal departments are facing when they are trying to find a way to improve on the AP process. So at ACOM, when we looked at all of these as we were designing our solution on AP automation, we felt that that solution should actually cover quite a few different elements, but essentially what our value proposition was that we should assume that our clients are going to continue to remain on the IBM iSeries platform so that they are not abandoning the investment they've made in their existing ERP system. So then the challenge that we created was that we should use technology to make your existing AP system better than what it is functioning in its initial status. And better can be either faster or more reliable or provide better information and, of course, provide cost savings. And the way we've done this is, again, through automation and to make our solution such that it is completely customizable. So it's a rules-based solution, and I will show you how that works. And for every client, we allow them to put their own rules in. So effectively, you're buying a fully customized solution, and that's how the whole process runs better. Now the question then becomes, well, this is great that it's running faster and with better information, but is there any metric that the AP department can look at and say, well, if we implement the ACOM solution, truly the process is better? And what we came up with was there is one metric which is actually something that is hard to dispute, and the metric itself I will get to, but it is essentially how many invoices can be processed by one AP staff person before automation was implemented and after automation was implemented. So that really becomes a key metric. So then the question comes down to, well, what is automation? And what we found is that automation is a term that is used very loosely. It could mean that some of your vendors are emailing you an invoice, and you then turn around and print it and treat that as a paper invoice from that point forward. But clearly, emailing you the invoice as opposed to mailing it to you is a step in the right direction, and that could be termed as automation. But in our mind, that is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other people who say, well, why don't we just take that invoice and run it through a scanner and use some technology called optical character recognition, or OCR, to grab information from that invoice, and that is automation. Yes, indeed, that is automation, but ultimately, that is, again, just a part of the whole process. So in our mind, when you're really talking about automation, as we investigated with our clients, here are the list of things that they said are items that need to happen in order for automation to be truly implemented. Because the whole goal of automation is you should have, if possible, a touchless system so that when the invoice arrives from the vendor, if it meets all of your rules, it goes straight into your ERP system and nobody needs to touch it. That is true automation, because that's how you get the speed process to increase. And to reach there, these 8 items that we have listed are in fact important elements. And when we are implementing this for any client, we go through this, and depending on which of these areas they are finding are more problematic for them, we design the rules to eliminate or at least reduce the time spent in that area. So this is actually a very important slide that, as you all are considering what to do in terms of automation, these would be the priorities that you should look at. So then the question becomes, if you actually implemented it, what is the end result? And here it is. In our experience, we found that before automation, one AP staff can usually process between 12 and 1,500 invoices per month. After the ACOM automation, almost all of our clients routinely hit 4 to 4,500 invoices a month. So essentially, you're tripling the volume that can be processed without adding to staff. And that is a very powerful metric that you can measure. And of course, because of this, then cost savings and all the other benefits accrue. So this is really the goal that we work towards with our clients. And what happens is you set the process up, the invoices come in, you start monitoring them, try to find out which invoices are causing issues, and based on that, you keep tweaking the rules to make them run better. So now, what are the processes that really need to be looked at? In an invoice, there are essentially, in terms of its processing, three main components. One is you've got to capture the data from the invoice. The other one is after it's captured, you need to match it and route it around. And then finally, when it is done, this invoice needs to get paid, and then it all gets stored in some kind of a storage and retrieval system. And all of these elements need to connect to your iSeries platform. So what we have built is a way to do this connection in these three circles that you see in the middle of the page and connect them to the iSeries, so you do not have to abandon anything that you've already built or own. And these three elements essentially just sit on top of your iSeries. What I'm going to do is go a little bit more into the invoice capture and the routing and approval part of these circles, and then I will turn it over to David to show you how the storage and retrieval component works. So on the invoice capture, the idea here is to make this thing electronic and make it a web-based invoice capture. So we actually create a mechanism whereby a vendor can submit invoices. Today is usually in just one method, which is they send the paper invoices to you, or occasionally they might email a few. Under our method, not only can they do that, but they can also submit them electronically, either as a Word or an Excel document, or even as a PDF. And then we also allow vendors to actually log into the system and directly enter the invoice into the system. So if it is a small vendor who's only submitting 1 or 2 invoices a month, that's an excellent way for them to submit the invoices. In the part where the vendors are submitting their paper invoices, which is how you would be getting the invoice today, what we do is we take that paper and we run it through this OCR software, the optical character recognition software, and we use a very sophisticated version of the software which actually captures not only all the data that's on the page, but every single line item on that invoice. So now we've got the data from the invoice and the image from the invoice, and we use that information to import it into this customized website that we have deployed for each client. And that data and that image is now imported into the site, and that's where all of the workflow rules come into effect. Similarly, if we get the data through a PDF or an Excel file, that information is again pulled in and it runs in against all of the rules that were built into the engine. So that's how we get the invoice and capture the data to import it into the website. Let me now go to the next section, which is how does the automated routing and approval work. And for this particular element, I'm actually going to log into a website and show you how the process works. So if I were to log into this website, which has been customized for this client called Vesuvius, I'm going to log in as an administrator to show you how the components work. So when a person were to log in, they can go in and search an invoice under various different elements. But if I were to say, well, show me all of the PO invoices that are in the system right now that failed the rules that we have set up for price variance, and there is one invoice. So if I go in here and I click on this invoice, what it is telling me is that here is the invoice. It has this particular line item here, and it's saying there is a price variance. There PO line 1, the amount invoiced for $867 is more than the purchase order amount of $760. So right away, this information has come to me that this invoice, which came from this Rogers Foam vendor, and here's all the PO number and the invoice number, it's given me all of the information that was electronically captured by the OCR method, and it ran it up against the PO data that was in the system. It did a comparison about the quantity and the price, and it found out what was wrong, and it has recorded the exact nature of what is wrong, and it has also automatically directed this to the purchasing department, in this case to Dolores Romo, who is actually the buyer on this particular PO, with exactly what is wrong. So now when Dolores logs in, she doesn't have a look at anything. All of the information is here. If they want to actually look at the invoice, they click the View button, and here is a copy of the invoice itself. So they can see what's on the invoice. They can look at the electronic rendition of the data that was on the invoice, and they know exactly what is the error, and then they can take the appropriate steps, and this invoice essentially can be resolved. We've got lots of different hold reasons that we have created, some of which are out here, where if goods arrive and there are no receipts, they go in here. If there are price variances, they show up here. Then we have a thing called additional charges. And additional charges are anything that is on an invoice that was not on the purchase order. And they then further get grouped into if these were charges based on tax or if they were based on freight, because we teach the system to look for a line, and if there's the word tax or sales tax or anything, it comes into this hold category. And if it is freight or shipping or anything like that, it can go into another category. And again, if you click on this, it tells you here were the two line items, and here, sure enough, they use the word tax. And so this is an additional charge that is on the invoice that was not in the purchase order, and a user can decide what to do with it. So what I showed you was the system has rules. The data is captured, it comes in, it matches up against the rules. If it fails a rule, we can put it into about 10 different reasons why it failed. It records exactly the line number on that invoice which caused it to fail, and then it automatically directs it to the person who is supposed to review it, and then that person can fix it. On the other hand, if it meets all of the rules, nobody needs to touch it, and this invoice goes into ready to export, and it is automatically sent out to your ERP system. So that's how the PO process works. The non-PO process, the way that works is the invoice comes in and it gets directed to whoever is the approver for this type of invoice, and you can set up the rules as to how it gets directed to a person, either by vendor number or a whole series of things. And when this invoice comes to that person, again, they can click on the View button to see what the invoice is like. They get a electronic rendition of the data, and if they agree this is correct, they can hit the Approve button. They also have the ability to do the GL coding, so all of the GL accounts are listed here, and when they pick it, it'll pre-fill everything else in. And when they're done, they hit the Approve button, so this thing is GL coded as well as it is approved. If the user, in this case it was sent to this user called Approver A1, if they have a question, they can go into this Notes section and type in whatever comment they want to, and then they can come down here and they can pick whoever they want to send this to, and if they pick that person, they basically hit the email button out here, and this it has automatically recorded the date and time, who the person is who recorded it, who it was sent to, and what was the comment. So now there's a history of all of the comments recorded, and ultimately when This person who needs to approve it gets whatever response they want, and they hit the approve button and it is done. So I just showed you how the non-PO approval process works. The system is very powerful, and in closing, all I can say is that every rule that you could possibly think of has already been pre-built into the system, so it is very easy to customize it for each user. With that, let me turn it back to David, who can show you that after the invoices have been approved and processed and sent to the ERP system, what happens next.
Thank you, Millen. Okay, we just talked about the invoice capture and then the automated routing and approval. The next step in the process is the storage of the invoice in a document management system along with the associated documents. So that's what we're going to show right now. The document management system is called Easy Content Manager. It's what we call a web-enabled or browser-enabled document management system. What that means is users access the system directly through a browser. That way there's no client software that has to be loaded on a PC or a workstation, and users can access, manage, and approve documents from anywhere they have an internet connection if you allow them to do so. So the folder structure that you see here inside of Easy Content Manager is completely user-defined. I've got accounts payable folder, I've got an accounts receivable folder, I'm storing contracts, HR stuff, and again this can be set up any way that you like, and the folders will represent the types of documents that you're storing. Within folders you'll have subfolders and you'll have subfolders under that, so it's very Windows-like. When the invoices come in from the Easy Access part of the software, they're stored in these folders and these subfolders, and you also can store, as I mentioned, associated documents like the purchase order, maybe the receiving document, and those documents can be automatically associated together. When you're looking for documents, there's a number of different ways to find those documents. The system will allow you to do what we call file content searches. These are Google-type full-text searches. You can search by the file title, the file name, the folder name. You can also do what we call advanced searches, and this is where you're searching for a document by a document type, or you can build what we call cross-document type searches, which will allow you to use any of what's called metadata, also known as index fields, and you can put a document type search together and find exactly what you're looking for. So let me show you what a document type search looks like. When I hit my drop-down list, these are all the different document types that I'm storing. So I can select the document type, and let's say I want to find an AP invoice. When I select the document type, it shows me now those index fields, again also called metadata fields, that are available for the document type. So for this one, I have invoice number, PO number, and vendor name, invoice date, and amount. So now I can search by any one or a combination of these index fields to bring back the specific document I want. If I know nothing here and I hit the search button, it's just going to show me every document that matches this document type. But let's say I do know the invoice number. So if I put in the invoice number and I hit the search button now, it's going to go back and specifically pull the invoice that match the invoice number, like you see here. So now I can right-click that document and I can view it, or maybe I need to email it to somebody or fax it to somebody if they need to see a copy of it. I can also look at the associated documents by clicking this button here. So if I push the link button here, I can see that my invoice is associated with the PO, and I can see both documents from this screen. The nice thing about linking is it allows you to create really what we call a virtual stapler, because you're going to take the documents that normally you might staple together if they were in paper form and allow you to electronically put them together. And this way, by searching for this invoice, I can see everything associated with it by pushing this button, regardless of where those documents are stored in Easy Content Manager, because they might be in completely different folders. So that's how you search for things directly through the browser interface. If you're working on the IBM I or the AS400, or whatever you prefer to call it, we can also access documents directly from those screens. So I want to show you an example of that. If I'm working on the AS400 side, and I'll call it the AS400 for purposes today, and I'm looking at an invoice, or I'm looking at something inside of an ERP, or anything really, I can come out to a value anywhere on the screen and I can highlight that value. So I'm going to select, in this case, the invoice number. And if I right-click it here with my hotkey, I can actually select the document type directly from Easy Content Manager. So remember, these are my document types, and I'm going to pick AP invoice, and I'm going to use the invoice number. And what it does is it goes back to Easy Content Manager and pulls that invoice up and shows it to me. So that way I'm able to access information directly from the IBM I or AS400 screens, and I don't have to leave those screens in order to get back to information inside of Easy Content Manager. Now, what I've shown you today is just a very brief view of the document management system. There are a lot of capabilities we don't have time to go into today, but hopefully this will spark your interest, and we can certainly schedule a one-on-one demonstration and show you a lot more of the details. I didn't talk about version management or retention management and some of the other things that are available in the system. So let me leave this screen here, and let's go back to the slides. And I'd like to go through just a couple more slides as we conclude the webinar. So what we just talked about was the invoice storage and retrieval piece, which is the product called Easy Content Manager. The last piece in the chain here is what we call the payment management side. This is basically the printing out of the payment or the electronic payment that can be generated. ACOM has a module to do that called Easy Pay Suite. We certainly don't have time to go into that today, but hopefully, again, if you do have interest, we can show you that at a later date as well, and we can go into that in more detail. So let me talk a little bit about the ACOM Advantage. We talked, and Millen showed you the powerful PO matching and workflow rules engine. We have web-based routing and approval workflows. The ability to go paperless on day one. There's not a lot of setup time if you're using the what we call the hosted version or the SaaS model, and you can be using this really on the first day. Automatic linking of documents associated with the transaction, including the copy of the payment. The ability to retrieve documents directly from the ERP screen like I showed you with the Easy Content Manager tool, and a vendor portal that shows status of invoices that are in process. The ACOM commitment, as Jim mentioned in the opening slides, ACOM is an industry leader in AP and document process automation. We have trained and certified professionals that do this every day. You can be fully automated day one, and by using the system, there are a number of other advantages you can gain. You can triple the number of invoice processed without adding staff. Eliminate manual work processing and routing of invoices. How many times have you routed paper around and had those invoices or those documents get lost in somebody's desk? This can all be automated, and time limits can be put on each step. You can match and pair invoices with the POs automatically. Reduce the frustration of manually working through exceptions. Instantly link invoices to the related documents like we talked about before, and securely access and manage all your business information from an electronic central repository. And then, of course, the ACOM Service and Support Organization. ACOM has been in business for 30 years, and we've done this for thousands of clients, and you get the ACOM support and organization behind you with every implementation. So with that, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar. At this point, we're going to open it up for questions. And so if you have questions, please type them into the GoToWebinar question panel also or in the chat panel, and we'll start answering some of those questions at this point. I'll let Jim Scott, who opened up the webinar for us, he can mediate the questions for us today. So Jim, I'll let you to handle that at this point.
Okay, thanks, David. We have a few. Here's the first one, and Millen, I think I'm going to direct this one to you. The question is, does your system replace the matching we currently have in our ERP system?
Jim, no, the answer is no. We do not replace that. Actually, what we are doing is we are complementing that in the sense that all of the rules that are in the ERP system, we have all of those in the ACOM solution, plus we have a lot more. So we certainly would ask you to leave those matching rules together, but the data that we are passing into the I-series would be what you might term as clean data, which means it should not get stopped there. And if it does, that means one of the rules in our system needs to be tweaked so it doesn't get stopped.
Okay, thank you. All right, here's the second question. And this is pertaining to the scanning and the OCR, the optical character recognition. How much information is actually picked up by the OCR engine, and what about the information that it does not pick up? In other words, what do I do with information that's not picked up? And Millen, I wonder if you can answer that one as well.
Sure. The OCR engines have become a lot more sophisticated now. So effectively, if the quality of that paper on which it is printed is good, in other words, it doesn't have, it's not a yellow piece of paper on which something is handwritten. if it's a regular typed paper or a PDF, we get 100% accuracy where everything can be read, including all of the line items. And what happens is that if the system doesn't read it the first time, every image is actually automatically stopped, and a user can look at it and actually correct the things that the system didn't read. And then when you save it, you are teaching the system so that the next time an invoice comes from the same vendor, it can actually read it. So two-part answer to your question, if it's a good quality invoice and the first pass through it will read everything. If it's not a good quality invoice, it may not read certain fields, but then you can manually enter those fields into the screen and then save that so that the next time that invoice from that vendor comes in, the OCR process will read it.
Okay, great, thank you. Here's another question that's also related to the OCR. This question is there a cost to the vendors to get set up on OCR? And let me sort of interpret the question. Actually, there is no cost to the vendor. The OCR step happens within your organization. So the typical scenario would be a vendor sends an invoice through the mail. You would, and this would be the standard invoice that they always send. Your organization would take that invoice, run it through a scanner, and from there, our OCR engine then reads the document and has the ability to extract the data. So the good news is there is no cost to the vendor to get set up on OCR. Let's see, another question. Millen, I'll direct this one to you as well. How do you handle the matching for service POs?
Service POs, or some people call them two-way POs, there is no quantity being received. So effectively, somebody has to approve the fact that the services were actually provided. So we actually treat it as a non-PO invoice. In other words, that invoice is actually routed around to whoever created the purchase order so that they can confirm that the services were actually provided. The same thing also holds true for what you might call a blanket PO, where there might just be a dollar amount set up as opposed to a physical quantity. So that's how we handle service POs.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's another one. Can incorrect invoices be returned to vendors? Millen, while you're at it, I thought maybe you would take that one.
Sure. Yes, they can, because just like we have the routing mechanism inside that I showed where it gets routed to people to approve, as long as you have the vendor's email address and you choose to set allow the vendor access to the system, then yes, if that invoice, like the one I showed where there was the invoice price was higher than the purchase order price, you could just simply direct that back to the vendor. In that case, the email, instead of going to your buyer, goes to the vendor, telling them this is a problem, and the content of that email can be customized to say either you are rejecting this invoice and they need to resubmit it, or you're going to hold it and let them correct it. So the answer is yes. You can choose to send a message back to the vendor, and it's you can do it vendor by vendor, so you don't have to open this facility to all of your vendors. You can only open it to some if that's what you decide.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Here's another question. David, I'm going to direct this one to you. You're not covering the payment process, but I saw a note about vendor enrollment. Can you tell me what that is? David, I think what might be helpful is to discuss the two functions, the ECM command and the vendor enrollment, just as an overview in terms of, what that payment engine is and how it does relate to the AP process.
Great, yeah, thanks, Jim. What happens is with the payment software or the payment module, when you process a payment, whether it's a paper payment or an ACH electronic payment, the image of that payment can be stored in the document management system automatically. So that way you can view that payment, like I showed you how we search for the invoice. You can see the payment. You can also see the associated documents to the payment, like the invoice. The vendor self-service, the vendor enrollment portal, is another piece that allows your vendors to access the payments outside, of course, outside of the software through the web browser. And that way they can go in, they can view their payments, they can manage their payments, they can also sign themselves up for ACH payments if they are a paper payee, meaning they're getting a laser check. And this portal then will take some of the work off of you, because the vendors are going in there, they're maintaining their own account information, and again, they're signing themselves up for ACH payments if they're not already electronic ACH payee. So hopefully, if there are additional questions on the portal, we can certainly schedule a one-on-one demonstration and show you that at a later date.
Okay. All right, that helps. And the recap on that is that the two big functions you mentioned is, one, when payments are processed, the software will automatically capture the image, a PDF, and the index files, move them into the repository, the Easy Content Manager, and provide the ability to link it to the related documents, invoice, purchase order, etc. And then the other function would be transitioning your vendors to ACH payments, which saves you a significant amount of money. Typically, roughly $2 per payment can be saved if you move your vendors to ACH, and this portal automates that, what we call enrollment process, and then gives your vendors the ability to view their past payments on a 24/7 basis through a portal as opposed to calling on the phone. So, okay. Let's see, and I see one more. This one is, let me pull this up. Did you say there is a vendor portal? Does this mean vendors could be directed to a website to check the payment status of invoices in which they have submitted? Millen, maybe that one you can address.
Yes, the answer is they certainly can, because what would happen is that once you've made payment, you could send back a payment file which has the invoices that were paid and the check or ACH number that was used to pay it. And when a vendor logs in, they will be restricted only to view invoices that are within their vendor number. And you can further restrict it that they can either only see invoices that are in the paid status, and in which case they would get to see this check number, or you can expand it where they can see invoices that are in the received status, which means they're going through the approval, and then once they are paid, they get paid. You can also choose to turn it on that as soon as a payment is made, an email will go out to the vendor telling them that a certain dollar amount payment has been made to them along with the check number, and then they can log into the system and see all the invoices that have been paid. So yes, any or all of these things can be turned on, and you can turn it on one vendor at a time or the whole group if you so choose.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Are there companies in the New York State area that are currently using this? I'm looking for companies near Syracuse, New York. What I would say is, off the top of my head, I don't know if we have someone in Syracuse. We do have a large number of customers, and we would be happy to provide you with companies that are using the system to help you, in your evaluation process. I would ask, just shoot us an email with the contact information you see on the screen, and we'll be happy to respond to you.
Jim, I actually recall there is a customer, I don't know how far it is from New York, from Syracuse, but it's not more than an hour away was my thought. But yes, I think if they send you the information, we can certainly provide that contact information.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that I can see. David, on your end, any further questions that you can see?
No, I think that's it. That's all I can see as well.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody. We appreciate your time this morning and this afternoon based on what time zone you're in. Please feel free to contact us, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss your AP automation needs. Thanks very much, and have a great day.